We're ready?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. President, thank you so much for bringing us in here today to be able to have this discussion.
Oh,
really
happy
appreciate
to.
it. I want to begin where you left off in this room last night. I know you couldn't see me. I was way behind the cameras in the back of the room there under Mr. Lincoln, getting my peek at it. But I could see what America couldn't see. I could see your family, the Vice President on that side of the room. I could see the First Lady and the Vice President holding hands as you were thanking them for everything they brought to your work here. When you got up from that desk last night, that was really the final big public moment in a 50-year political career. Yeah, that's how long it was. You've served in government longer than any person who's ever served in this job. What did that feel like at the end of that speech? We were pushed out of the room as people were surrounding you, hugging you, and as that emotion was filling the room. But was there a sense of the release of a burden getting up from that desk?
No, but there was a sense that of serious concern. You've known me a long time. I really am concerned about how fragile democracy is. That sounds corny, but I mean, I really am concerned because you've heard me say it 100 times. I really think we're at an inflection point in history here. We're unrelated to any particular leader. Things are going to change drastically. And it occurs every 5 or 6 generations. And it usually is generated by technology, usually generated by, I mean, for example, if Gutenberg didn't invent the printing press, how would Europe ever gotten united in any way to understand what each country is thinking? I mean, it sounds stupid, but it really matters. And what I realize is that, look, I got involved, I didn't think about it this way, but I got involved in public life because of the abuse of power. I mean, my dad would say, you know, the greatest sin of all is the abuse of power. And I was raised in a circumstance where, like I used to always talk about how the worst thing ever happened to me was I used to stutter when I was a kid. And you really get made fun of when you talk like that. And, but I realized that maybe it was the greatest gift I ever got, because there's so many people who are in circumstances where they have something that they're dealing with that's beyond their immediate control. And I watched how I was a runt when I was a kid. I was a small kid. I was a pretty good athlete all the time, but I was, and you know, I learned how to fight when I didn't want to fight. But when you get made fun of, you learn to step up. But what it did was, it made me realize that there's so damn many bullies around. And I now extrapolate that all the way to democracy. The reason for all the safeguards out there is, in a very trite way to say it, keep the bullies from taking advantage of everybody else. They're basic guardrails. And I think that this concentration of enormous wealth and power in a circumstance where everything's changing, and the biggest thing is changing is how we communicate with one another. I mean, all kidding aside, did you ever get to the point where you weren't sure who the editors were? Who's out there saying, no, you can't print that? You can't say it's not true. I mean, it's like, and when the multi, and when people aren't participating in paying their fair share, I have no problem with people making millions of dollars. But for God's sake, pay your fair share. And taxes and participation. And so I don't know, I just think things are at a point where it's awful hard to, I've had 4 of your colleagues in the last 4 years tell me they're worried they're going to be real serious players like you, not you, with your caliber worried about whether or not they're going to be held accountable for telling the truth. When the hell's that ever happened in America? I mean, a long time. So I guess what I'm worried about is that the thing that keeps it on track are the guardrails. There's a Supreme Court that's independent, but accountable. There's a Congress that you speak your mind, but you're held accountable to basic standards. There's a presidency that says you have really limited powers. I mean, you're the top dog, but you're not. You can't dictate everything. And I don't know. We just seem to be chipping away at all those elements.
Last night, you issued the warning about the power of the tech industrial complex, an echo of President Eisenhower in this very room in his farewell address, the warning about the military industrial complex. And you said that an oligarchy is taking shape that threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. How does this oligarchy affect people out there who've never used the word oligarchy, the people who you're saying might not get a fair shot because of the way this is going?
Well, look, if the decision is made that the multi-billionaires, the super wealthy, the wealthiest people in the world, begin to control all the apparatuses from the media to the economy, then who do I get to fight back for me? Who do I get to? I mean, look, I think everybody deserves just a shot. Not a guarantee, just a shot. How the hell can you make it in society today if you don't have access to an education? You don't have access to adequate health care. You don't have access to the opportunity to have a job that you can handle, where you can make ends meet. I mean, one of the things I think there's two things I'm proud of so far. I know they'll last. We changed the basic formula of how to make an economy work. The trickle-down stuff about, well, let the people go out and make a lot of money, and the benefits will flow from that will trickle down to middle class and working class people. My dad used to say, not a whole lot ever trickled down his kitchen table. And so, you know, what I did was, I admit to you, I didn't know. If Pat Moynihan had been around, I could have just asked him, he could have told me. But that back in the early 30s, when Roosevelt was trying to protect unions from being overrun by corporate America, they passed a law that said that when a president is given money by the Congress, he should spend that money hiring American people to do what it needed to be done and using American products. That's been honored in a breach. So we focused on that. That's why I worked so damn hard to give unions more power, to give unions the ability to negotiate. And I think that's what we did is we invested more in America. That's why the CHIPS and Science Act. Well, hell, we invented the damn things. We modernized them. We used to have 40% of the market. But what happened? Corporate America and a lot of politicians decided that let's find the cheapest labor we can find in the world to build these little chips about the size of the tip of my finger, and then import them. So we'll pay a hell of a lot less to have them made, and then we'll import them. And we import them, we make more money because we're paying a hell of a lot less for them. Well, guess what? This thing called supply chains. When pandemic hit, it hit the whole world. It hit everyone from Taiwan to Asia to all across Japan, all the places where they make these chips, or started to make these chips, Korea. And guess what? We found out you need about 300 of them to build a new car. Well, they can't build new cars now, so guess what? The price of automobiles went through the roof. The cell phone you have, you need a chip. You need a chip for a weapon. You need a chip for everything. And so I just thought we weren't fighting to get in the game again, to be the leader in the world on economic initiatives. And not that we weren't going to share it with anybody, but that we were not going to allow people to cut us off. And so when that happened, everything I did, I made sure that we were making sure that we're spending the money, hiring. If we're going to build a bridge, hire American workers. If you're going to build a bridge, use American steel. Use the things that grow the American economy. We weren't growing the economy. So when I talk about what's going on in terms of these, what's the investments that are being made, the investments are made, find the cheapest labor anywhere in the world, bring it home, find the cheapest way to spend it, to engage it, and make the most money you can. Well, guess what? It really damages America's ability, any country's ability to compete. Anyway, that's your
You have had the busiest last week as president than any president since Jimmy Carter, both engaged in the same thing, a hostage release negotiation, which seems to have succeeded. Did you have any discussions about the ceasefire negotiations with the President-elect Trump this week or last week as the deal was coming to a close?
No.
Have you discussed it with him at all since the election?
No, very, very briefly, when he came in here, I spent 2 hours with him to try to change the nature of the transfer of power so it was done peacefully. And I told him what I was doing, what I thought could happen. But what we did, we brought in the people, or going to be his national security people. We brought them in closer to tell them what was happening as we hand this off. Look, the idea that we're going to be in a situation where we could continue to have the chaos in the Middle East without the running a risk of starting a regional war is really, really not possible. And the idea that Israel is going to be able to sustain itself for the long term without accommodating the Palestinian question and their safety, their meaning the safety of American Jews, not possible. It's not going to happen. So I've been spending a lot of time the last 4 years with the Egyptians, the Qataris, with the Saudis, with the Arab countries to talk about what is their interest. Why is it in their interest to see this change, this dynamic change? And I kept reminding my friend, and he is a friend, although we don't agree a whole lot lately, Bibi Netanyahu, that he has to find a way to accommodate the legitimate concerns of a large group of people called Palestinians who have no place to live independently. And so how do you deal with those things? So I did really put together, if it doesn't work, I got to take the blame for it, a plan with my national security team. But I believe that we could make it attractive to the Arab world as well as to the Jewish community to accommodate the kind of changes necessary. Get the prisoners released, get a ceasefire, move in a direction where we agreed how this was going to work and how Israel's troops were going to move, how we're going to bring in rebuilding the Gaza Strip and the economy, how we're going to clean all this up, how we're going to protect Israel. In the meantime, what we were able to do, and I know it was very controversial when I did it, we also decided that we were going to protect Israel from outside sources. So when Iran thought it was going to blow Israel off the map, they had those thousands of missiles heading their way. Well, guess what? We put together the countries, didn't let it happen. Now, every one of the countries and the groups and the like Hezbollah and Hamas, and they're all a hell of a lot weaker. Iran is significantly weaker than it was before. Israel is in a situation where it is physically stronger in terms of protecting itself from outside interference from major powers. In addition to that, you have a circumstance where all of a sudden, people began to figure out, well, it makes more sense if we work this thing out a little bit. I've been dealing since I got elected with the Saudis about, I introduced when the G20 occurred, a proposal as to how to connect everything from India to England, and because there was a natural corridor of economic development of that way. And, I said, well, no, that'll never get passed. I started this initiative, used to be called Build Back Better, but now it's called PIIG, whatever. And because how do you make it in the 21st century with all the changes taking place in technology without having an infrastructure that can sustain the changes? And most of these countries countries in Africa, for example, are way in debt and don't have the infrastructure to capacity to build the infrastructure. And so that's why, remember when they said, well, we'll never get an infrastructure bill? Well,
listen, I said you'd never get an infrastructure bill.
Did you?
With my legislative experience, having worked in the Senate, I didn't see how it was possible with this tiny, smallest Senate majority in history. To this day, it looks like a magic trick to me how you pulled that off.
Well, look, the argument I made to the congressmen and senators when it come down is how can you lead the world without having the most modern infrastructure in the world?
You combined domestic policy and foreign policy
Absolutely,
in a way that I've never heard another president do.
Well, by the way, because it's necessary. There's no way to implement our foreign policy unless we're, in terms of our economic policy, we're in a strong position to do it. Look, Lawrence, you're one of the most informed people I know. I'm not being solicitous. Well, I shouldn't say that, it hurts your reputation, but all kidding aside, think about it. How can, if we don't lead the world, who leads the world? What happens? I don't mean dominate. I mean lead the world on basic fundamental principles, like the UN Charter, those kind of. Who steps up? Who has the capacity to do that? We have the size, we have the scope, we have the ability, we have the technology. But we just have to get back in the game. And that's all I've really done is take an economy that accommodated the foreign policy that allowed us to change the dynamic. For example, I mean, I knew what Putin was doing when he was amassing forces. Everybody said he's not going to go into. I knew what he was going to do, so I
When did you know he was going to go in?
I knew he was going to go in about 3 weeks before he amassed those extra troops along the border.
And when did you decide, when did you make the presidential decision about what your response, this country's response, would be? Because you had to be given a menu. There's a menu, always a menu.
But the menu...
The menu includes doing nothing a lot of times.
That's right. There is a menu, but I already knew what the menu was. Look, Henry Kissinger called me 10 days before he died. And he said, not since Napoleon has Europe not looked over its shoulder at Russia with a sense of dread until now. I started, when Putin said to me he wanted to see the Finlandization of Europe, I said, I'll tell you what you're going to get. You're going to get the Finlandization, you get the NATOization of Finland. And I was talking to the leaders of Finland as well as Sweden. And I said, look, you guys have a real problem. And I spent over, I think it was, they calculated in the first couple of years, about 180 hours trying to put NATO back together again. Working, on the phone, in meetings, going on, saying, look, we got to do this. Because if we don't, what happens? What the hell happens? None of those countries alone can sustain the onslaught alone. So we tightened NATO, made it stronger, significantly stronger. And all of a sudden, Putin found himself in a position, well, wait a minute, where the hell I go? They've lost over 670,000 people. Either wounded or dead. Brought in the Chinese, the North Koreans. They're losing big time too. It doesn't mean they're going to lose everything, but it means they're not going to be able to have the kind of win he thought. When I sat down with him in I guess it was in Switzerland, before we took office, but after we had won, and I was trying to work out something on nuclear power to see if we wouldn't go to space with nuclear. And we got into this debate about what was Europe going to look like. And it was clear to me, if you read his speech, go back and get the speech he made early on, He talks about Kyiv as the birthplace of Mother Russia. That is, all he wants to do is reestablish the old Warsaw Pact. He wants to establish that control over. Can't let that happen. This guy is not a good guy. He has, I mean, anyway. So,
you made the point in your State Department speech, it was quite striking, that you're the one who has walked the middle of Kyiv. Putin never got there. And I'm not sure anyone, I'm sure no one would have predicted of these two leaders which one is going to be the first one in Kyiv when this war started. And when this war started, there was a tremendous tension about the possibility of nuclear confrontation, the possibility of Vladimir Putin using nuclear weapons. Did you have any direct communication with Vladimir Putin to deter him from using nuclear weapons?
What I did, when he started talking about tactical, I thought, this guy wants to use tactical nuclear weapons. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons in Europe scares the hell out of everybody, including the Russians. Including the Russians. And so what I made it clear to him, look, he said to me that what he wanted was, he wanted to make sure that there were no nuclear weapons in Europe, in Ukraine, that they weren't a member of NATO, and that they would not be, and he started off one of the conversations by saying, I know you can take me out tomorrow. I know you can take me out tomorrow from Ukraine. You can strike Moscow. You can strike. I said, well, that's not a problem. We've already taken the nuclear weapons out. So took them all out. There's none there. We're not going to put any back in. And they're not going to become part of NATO until they change their system significantly. We're going to continue to help them grow if we can, but those two things aren't going to happen. But you're not going to go in and take them. You're not going to go in and claim the area. And you remember, Lawrence, when I said they were going to go in, everybody said, oh, no, that's not going to happen.
Again, I didn't think it was going to happen. An expert I know who works in Ukraine told me it's not going to happen. No one here in Ukraine thinks it's going to happen because it seemed so irrational for Putin to do that.
But listen, read what he said. Go back. This guy means what he says. He really talked about this being part of Mother Russia. He thinks...
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit like, you may remember, I found myself with the former Pope, who was much more conservative, and he wanted to see me after I spent some time in Poland, because I had said, remember John Rich, you know John, great guy. John and I went to Poland, and I came back and said, they're gonna leave the Warsaw Pact. They're not gonna be, a year from now, they're not gonna be part of NATO. He said, don't write that. You'll ruin your reputation. You'll ruin your reputation, don't write that. I was confident it was true. You could see when you talked to them what was going on. And the end result was that, okay, what happened now is they pull out. All of a sudden, the whole dynamic changes in Europe. Everything's moving. Remember what was going on in Hungary at the time? Remember Tom Lantos and talking about all? Anyway, the end result was that Europe was beginning to lose its structure. And I was convinced you could build a structure that was economically and politically more open and sound, and without getting into a nuclear war. That's why we never put American forces in there. I didn't want him to have an excuse to say we're putting the other major nuclear power in the world is, that wasn't the case. And so the end result of it was clear to me what he was going to do. I got the National Security Council to move in the direction where I could use the data without revealing national secrets, that they were going to move in. They moved in, by the way.
You revealed a lot at that time. I have to say, we've never seen anything quite like that. You publicly revealing what you believed the intelligence showed Vladimir Putin was going to do.
And the reason why I did is I wanted people to believe me, know what I was talking about. I knew more what I was talking about at that point because of the position I was in than anybody else did.
Sure.
And when they said, he might never do that, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. And
Can I ask you about a decision you made in the middle of this war in Ukraine that no president before you has ever made? And that was a decision to enter a war zone not controlled by U.S. troops. I am sure there were people who walked into this room and advised you not to do that.
everybody kind of, well, look.
I mean, and I meant for security reasons.
No.
The Secret Service could not have been happy the day they heard that.
No, I know. They were very unhappy.
Yeah.
But I didn't think that Putin would dare take out an American president. I was worried, concerned about a radical element within Ukraine that was under the control or working with the Russians might try to do. That's why we went so way out of our way to get the best people to travel in that 10-hour ride in that train. And but I thought it was important that we demonstrate to the rest of the European leaders, stand up, man. We can stand up and do this. We can prevent this from happening. My concern was if we didn't go, we didn't show up, then who leads? What happens? I didn't think it, by the way, I didn't think it was, I've got to go to Ukraine, but I think it was important that we treat Ukraine like an independent country, wanted to talk to them, I wanted them to know that we were with them. And it was the best way to do that.
As I said, the way you blend foreign policy and domestic policy is really been extraordinary. You began your State Department speech this week with material from this, which is just being released now. Your report on investing in America. I believe I have the first official public copy of it.
You do. My staff told me they gave that to you.
And I'm reading in there about water projects in Alabama and projects around the country that will be done after you leave this office, will be worked on after you've left this office, for which it is very unlikely they're going to name it the Biden Water Project in Alabama. And so there's so much to talk about in terms of just your domestic achievements alone. This is the largest list of domestic achievements that I can think of, certainly in my lifetime of watching this. But I want to bring this down to something about your presidential decision-making in that entire range of domestic policy decisions, of which there were so many. And I'm particularly interested in Joe Biden versus Larry Summers. And here's what I mean by that. You're in here as the President of the United States, who we know as Joe from Scranton. And when you are creating your domestic policy response to the COVID pandemic, the stimulus that is going to be necessary for the economy, money that's going to be necessary to put into people's checking accounts, and then all of the domestic infrastructure spending you're doing, Harvard economics professor Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, a very well-regarded economist around the world, is out there arguing these policies are risky. This risks inflation, significant risk of inflation. He warned against inflation very loudly. He also then predicted, when you overruled that particular piece of advice, he then predicted that we would be in a recession eventually, which has not happened. But
well, almost everybody predicted.
How do you, in the presidential position of having to make these decisions, when you're hearing prestigious economists like him and other voices out there, and possibly people within the administration, giving you counter advice to the direction you want to go, how do you then decide to make that decision to go ahead?
Two things. One, look, I looked at the practical need for us to instill some confidence in the American people that we can grow this economy. And one of the biggest pieces of that was invest in America. Everybody thought, and I thought Barack was a great president. I was his vice president. We went through some, but remember the argument, well, I thought we didn't do enough. I thought we didn't invest enough because we were doing the old basic old economics from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
But at the time, you did do what you called a very big deal, Obamacare, which was a gigantic
Exactly
legislative
right.
achievement.
Exactly right. And I did that for two reasons. Well, that was the president was the leader on that. But we did that for two reasons. One, it was necessary. Look, nothing works unless if you conclude the only way to deal with inflation is to create unemployment and another recession, because you had to make sure that we lost jobs. That's the only way you're going to keep the inflation down. But guess what? I was absolutely convinced. Give the American people half a shot. They'll step up and get the job done if you give them the opportunity. Look what they did. They stepped up in every major endeavor. And the idea, and I never believed we couldn't have a soft landing. We had a soft landing. Inflation's down almost to 2%. A lot going on. But the first thing we had to do was go out and take care. And I had an advantage and disadvantage. I had a thing called a pandemic that was so badly handled that we were still dealing with people, thousands of people a day dying in America. Well, first of all, it was rationale to spend the money to go take care of that. That was the first big piece of legislation that got passed. And secondly, when I came along and said, look, in addition to that, we can now change the dynamic and invest more in the things that make us who we are. For example, I remember walking through I used to commute every day to Delaware, 300 miles a day, basically, each way, total round trip. And going through the Baltimore Tunnel. I'm probably the only guy that's not an engineer that walked through that tunnel. Last piece of work done in that tunnel going under the bay was, I think it was like 1917 or 18 or 19. Light bulbs hanging down from inside, the water leaking in. I mean, what else are we talking about, man? So these are things and they were going to create jobs immediately. So you start building that tunnel, you're creating thousands of jobs. People are getting paid a good salary. You're generating American product to build it. And look, the other thing, Lawrence, I got a lot of criticism, understandably. We've invested more in red states than blue states.
That's in this book. That's in this report.
Well, for two reasons. One, red states really screwed up in terms of the way they handle their economy and the way they handle manufacturing, the way they handle access to supply chains. You know, I remember being out in Iowa, and I remember one of the big issues was that there was a small plant for 300 people, been around for 70 years. My grandfather worked there, I worked there, my son works there, and they had the best education system at the time, and rated the best state education system in the country. And all of a sudden, the kid comes home after he graduates and said, Mom, I got to leave. There's no job for me here. The factory shut down. Well, guess what? How do you run a country that way? How do you do that? So, for example, that's why I worked so damn hard to get the CHIPS and Science Act done. It brought in billions of dollars in investment, billions. Now, the problem is, it's only now starting to see it because it takes time to get it done. But the point is, and we ended up bringing $1 trillion off the sidelines, not just there, but an investment. I was absolutely convinced, give the people half a shot at a job where they can make a decent living, and you can't deny them the opportunity to form a union to get a good wage. For example, I'm getting off. But my point is, I was never bought on to the notion, if the only way in 2021 you grow the economy was significantly increase unemployment in order to take control of what we're talking about in terms of inflation. Where the hell are we? What happens? But people are now we got a lot of work to do yet, but people are now having faith in we can do these things. We can build these cars, we can do that. And people are investing in it. And people are taking those jobs, and it's attracting money into the economy. And inflation's going down. We have a lot of problems. We do have a lot of corporate greed still out there in terms of everything from what we do with the basic needs of American people, from eggs to butter to bread to gasoline. But we're also dealing with that. But it seems to me, I don't know how we can be the leader in terms of our national security if we're not also one of the wealthiest countries in the world that funds it all and convinces other people we're willing to play with them. We're willing to work with them. We're not trying to cut them out. We're going to cut them in. Anyway, I just think that, and I never bought the argument that it was going to cause a significant recession. Now, most of these guys are talking about a soft landing. We got more work to do. But the idea, the way we're going to deal with inflation is create more unemployment.
That has been a policy choice made by previous presidents.
I know, and I think I've thought it was wrong for a long time.
Yeah.
Look.
Could I ask you about something you've said about your own political approach to this? And that is you said it was stupid as a joke that you didn't sign the checks that went out to people from your administration when you were giving COVID help after Donald Trump put his name on the checks that went out during his administration. And when I heard that, I believe I know what that was. I believe that you were approaching it exactly the same way the guy over the fireplace, Franklin Roosevelt, approached Social Security checks. First one went out in 1940 when he's running for re-election, and it's signed by the chief disbursing officer of the Treasury, because it would be indecent and beyond his comprehension that a president would dare take credit for something that was legislated by the Congress and that was enacted that way. And I'm assuming, did it cross your mind to put your name on the checks?
Only in that I kept being hearing from other people. The president sent me a check for $7,500. The president did it. Why aren't you helping me? Well, it was a bill we did, but anyway. It did cross my mind, but what the mistake we made was, I think I made, was not getting our allies to acknowledge that the Democrats did this. So, for example, build a new $1 billion bridge over a river. We'll call it the Democratic Bridge, figuratively speaking. Talk about who put it together. Let people know that this was something the Democrats did, that it was done by the party. That's different than me writing a check and me signing a check and saying, I did it. I'm not a very good huckster. I mean, you know, that wasn't a stupid thing for him to do. It helped him a lot. And it undermined our ability to convince people that we were the ones that were getting this to them. And so, but I don't think, ironically, I almost spent too much time on the policy, not enough time on the politics. Because, I mean, you know, you have some senators in Congress, Democratic senators in Congress, saying, well, you know, Joe Biden did this, and this is done by so-and-so and so-and-so, and this is the new, you know, built by the Democratic Party kind of thing. Let people know who was responsible for this happening. But it just seems, I know it sounds so stupid to say it, almost bad taste.
Bad taste does not sound stupid, and we've been getting the signal to wrap this up for a while, and so we will. Quick question. When was the first time you said the words ceasefire to Prime Minister Netanyahu?
The first time was probably when he moved really hard on the Philadelphia line and took out a hospital. Now, it's true that Sinwar and those guys were hiding beneath the hospital. The thing about Hamas is they had all their facilities underneath schools, hospitals, churches. I mean, you know, so you had, and to get them, you had to take people out. Let me put it this way. I'll just say, when I went to Israel immediately after their attack by Hamas, 8 days later, whatever it was, And I told him we were going to help. And I said, but Bibi, I said, you can't be carpet bombing these communities. And he said to me, well, you did it. You carpet bombed, not his exact words, but you carpet bombed Berlin. You dropped a nuclear weapon. You killed thousands of innocent people because you had to in order to win a war. I said, but that's why we came up with the UN. New deals by which what we would do relative to civilians and military.
So he was comparing 21st century war tactics, battle tactics, with World War II.
Well, what he was really doing is he was going after me for saying you can't indiscriminately bomb civilian areas, even if the bad guys are there. Even if the bad guys are there, you can't take out 2, 10, 12, 1,500 people, innocent people, in order to get the one bad guy. And he made a legitimate argument. His perspective said, look, these are the guys that kill my people. These are the guys that are all over in these tunnels. Nobody had any idea the miles of tunnels were down there. It's amazing what they built. And they're sometimes 200 feet under the ground. Well, the way to get to them is take out the places where they were under which they got to the tunnels. And so that's the first time I had the discussion about bombing civilian areas was when I went over after the 9/11, after the massacre that occurred.
So on that first trip, 10, 11 days after October 7th, you already raised the issues of how to get to a ceasefire.
Well, not a ceasefire, how to prevent innocent death.
Yes.
And then I pushed really, really hard for more humanitarian aid to go in and ways to get it in. And Bibi, look, in fairness to Bibi, he's got a tough coalition too, man. He's got the most conservative cabinet of any Israeli prime minister ever.
With that, did you have reason to believe that the prime minister was delaying agreement with a ceasefire for his own politics and with the political knowledge that a ceasefire would help your reelection campaign or Vice President Harris's presidential campaign?
No, I don't think it had to do with it to help our campaign versus Trump. I don't think that was his calculus. But I do think he's in a position where, even now, it takes a lot of courage for him to take on that coalition he has. Because they're going to vote him out of office tomorrow. Remember, there was already the big fight about what he was going to do relative to the court. And so, in fairness to Bibi, he had enormous political pressure not to do some of the things, that in my belief I thought were counterproductive.
Mr. President, I'd like to end this conversation where we began it, which is you last night getting up from that desk, and as I was being hustled out of the room with the rest of the press, I saw your family surrounding you, Vice President, and whenever I see that group and I see that moment with the Biden family, I always see the one who wasn't there. I always see Beau, and I always wonder as I was walking down the hall, what would Beau be saying to his father right now?
Look, Beau is a better man than I am. I ask myself a couple times a month, what would Beau do? He was the Attorney General who would have been the odds-on favorite to win the government. I mean, when he went to Iraq for a year. Beau and Hunter have always had faith in my instincts, what I think. You've heard Barack get mad at me when I was a kid all the time. He said, I know, all politics is personal.
Yeah.
Well, it's about understanding what motivates the other guy, other woman, and what their interests are. And I think that let me end it this way. When I ran as a 29-year-old kid for the United States Senate against, you know him, Caleb Boggs, a really fine guy, a moderate Republican. He was a supporter of the Clean Air Act. And Nixon won my state by only 60%, about 60% of the vote, and I won by 3,100 votes. And I made 3,800 votes. And everybody say, "What's the secret? What's the secret?" No, because it's a logical thing. Every new candidate, what'd you figure out? How'd you do that? You're the first guy to win. And I said, you got to figure out what's worth losing over. What's worth losing over? Don't figure it out. You should get in another business. Go make money. Do something else. But I think it's important. And nothing noble about this. I've never proposed something or did something that I believe is a mistake. I made mistakes, but that I believe it was a mistake just to stay in office. And so I said, all these young new candidates, what's the secret? I said, have you figured out what's worth losing over? And all kidding aside, why would you get into this job? What's the value of this job? Not to be president of the United States Senate, unless you know what you want to change. And I'm convinced that people, it's really important to understand where the other guy's coming from. One of the things I learned when I got to the Senate, how different the interest, the legitimate interest of someone living in Wyoming is than someone living in New Jersey. Different interest. Sort of solid Americans, but out in Wyoming, man, you better get more energy, get more things moving. New Jersey, you better make sure you're dealing with clean air. And so there's real differences among us. We're 50 different states, 50 many countries. And as long as you understand what's motivating the other guy, the other woman, that is based on something that they genuinely believe is an interest of the state, you can work something out. You can sit down and say, okay, look, but if you know it's just done for power or for a special interest, then you don't have to pay attention to it. I'm getting way over my skis here.
Mr. President, I just can't thank you enough for joining me in this conversation today. Thank you for your 50 years of service. And again, thank you for joining this conversation today.
Well, I tell you what, man, I'm really only 40. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you.